Here we have Pastor Cliffe, and he is talking to students at Texas State University, and he is getting slammed left and right with really tough questions. I think he handles them really well, answers them really well. He does a great job at answering objections to God and Christianity. I think there's a lot that you could get from this, so let's jump right into it.
Why can't there be multiple gods that we can believe in? And why can't there be multiple ways into heaven?
Good. There can be. But you see, what you've got to answer, ma'am, is why would you believe in heaven? Have you ever been there? Neither have I. So in light of the fact you've never seen heaven, why would you as a thinking human being believe there's a heaven?
I mean,
why?
Through the Christian faith, is there not the communication that if you do live by the faith, you are forgiven, you go to heaven?
Yes, but ma'am, my being convinced that I'm going to heaven is based on one thing: the trustworthiness of Jesus Christ. Because I've never been to heaven. So I don't know if there's a heaven or not from my experience. And I can promise you, Austin is not heaven. Okay? It's a very nice place, but it's not heaven.
Right.
Okay? So you see, ma'am, when it comes to heaven, you're going to have to trust somebody the same way I'm going to have to trust somebody. And the question is, why do you trust whoever it is you trust? So because Muhammad contradicts Jesus, and because Jesus contradicts the avatars of Hinduism, and because the avatars of Hinduism contradict Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, and because they all contradict Baha'i faith, you've got to be on the intellectual level of a cockroach if you say they're all saying the same thing.
And what Cliffe's trying to get at here is there's something called the law of non-contradiction. So if 1 + 1 = 2, 1 + 1 can't also equal 3. So an example of that is Christians say that Jesus is God. Muslims say that Jesus is not God. Hindus say there are many gods. And Buddhists say that there isn't a personal, omnipotent God in the Abrahamic sense. So let's keep going with that.
They're not, ma'am. They're contradicting each other. So either they're all wrong or one of them's right. And now you've got to study the Gospels for yourself, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you got to ask yourself, does the evidence point to Jesus being the truth? And if it does, trust him. But if the evidence is that Christ is a liar, you'd be a fool to trust him. Do not trust Jesus if the evidence is he's a fraud, he's a hypocrite, he's a liar. Don't trust him. But if the evidence is he's totally reliable, if the evidence is he really did die and rise from the dead, then you can trust him, and he's the one who promises heaven to everybody who puts their faith in him. A lot of my friends are atheists and agnostic, okay? And here's something that my atheist agnostic friends have to acknowledge if they're being intellectually consistent. Because they believe there's no heaven, no day of judgment, that has big implications for now, today. And the implication is what you and I do with our lives is ultimately meaningless. Why?
When Cliffe says that life is ultimately meaningless without God, he's not saying that you can't create your own meaning. You know, when you go out living through your day, maybe you can create meaning through getting money, success in business, reading books, having a family. There are ways that we can create subjective meaning, but when it comes to ultimately what happens after we die, it's a different story. I'll leave that for him.
Where are Hitler and Mother Teresa if there is no heaven and no hell? Where are Hitler and Mother Teresa? The same place. The fertilizer pit. They're decomposing. Which means, ultimately, it does not matter whether you are Adolf Hitler II or whether you're Mother Teresa II, because we're all going to the same place, the fertilizer pit. You see, Jesus says, no, there is eternity out there, and there's a heaven and a hell, and there's a day of judgment, which means the decisions that you make today are really significant. They really matter. And you are really valuable because God wants you to live for eternity with him in heaven. And becoming fertilizer is not God's plan for you and desire for you. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you so much for raising that. Yes, sir.
There's been a couple issues of things that you've been saying that I have questions with, but I'm just going to do a quick quick short one. One of my main questions that I always have
Yeah.
is just that given what you touted earlier, a tri-omni God, a omnibenevolent, omnipotent,
Right.
omniscient, just all-powerful, all-knowing, all-caring, how do you explain the existence of evil and suffering?
You bet. Very slowly, having to acknowledge I can't give you a complete answer. I do not know ultimately why God allowed evil, suffering, and death. But here's my first point. If you're an atheist or if you're an agnostic, what is your solution to the problem of evil and death?
My solution to the evil
The
problem?
solution. What is your solution to the problem of evil and death? If you're an atheist, if you're an agnostic.
I mean, the solution for everybody is just to be as good as possible. I mean, everybody should aim for being good.
According to their own definition of good, right?
Becoming, own definition of good, whether it's objective good from God or objective good from another source.
Well, remember, the atheist or agnostic says either there is no God or I don't know whether there's a God.
Yeah.
So good is not defined by God if you're an atheist.
Yeah.
If you're an atheist, good is defined by your culture or by the power elite or by yourself or by majority opinion.
It could be just defined as good. It's just good just exists, whether God or not.
How can good just exist?
Good could possibly, because I don't know if there's a God or not.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if there is such a thing as a God that is out of time, like that is eternal, why
Right.
can't other concepts like good just
Right.
be out of time and eternal, just a thing that exists like God?
Okay. Sir, good is an intangible value. You cannot see good.
You can't see
cannot-
God either.
Exactly. You cannot measure good, right?
You can't measure God. It
Good,
could exist
exactly.
eternally, just like it could just be God. It could just be God. It could not be just God. It could just be the existence of good and evil that just exists in the world. But
Okay,
given
here-
a tri-omni God who's all-powerful and all-caring, why evil and suffering exists
Right.
doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, good. You hang with me and we'll go.
He's as powerful
Sir,
and caring as he
In
says.
order
it
to
should
understand goodness, there has to be a mind. This tree has no understanding of good. This cement has no understanding of good. See, good can't just exist. Because goodness requires definition. And it's an intangible value that you can't measure. You can't grab goodness. Which means you got to have a mind involved in defining what is good.
stop. If we're going by that definition, then what is defining God?
Okay,
What
we'll get to
created
that.
God?
We'll get to that.
All the arguments you could give for God could also go for good, just as
No.
a general concept. It could
Because
just
what I'm-
exist eternally out of time, unmeasurable.
No, sir. That's not fair. If God exists, God doesn't depend on anybody. If goodness as an intangible value exists, it depends on a mind to
God
define
would
it.
also be an intangible.
Obviously, that's right.
It's like coming from a different viewpoint, outside of trying to see where, the reasoning for things. You could say that it could be what we define as God, societally, could just be the existence of just that good, in the same context of eternal and timeless and all
No.
that. Like,
If there is no God, goodness is not eternal, because goodness demands a mind to define it.
then
Which means?
Then in giving that same argument, then what mind defines God? There would be something above him if something has to make him or define him. Or
No, God can be an eternal being without beginning, without end.
I don't think you see my point, because just goodness could be the same thing.
You're not listening, sir.
You're giving goodness a different definition.
No, sir, you're not listening to me, and I don't appreciate it. I told you flat out, and I think you're smart enough to get this point. Goodness demands some mind to define it. The tree, the cement, has no ability to understand goodness. You've got to have a mind. Do you see that, or do you disagree with me?
I think we're coming to different definitions of good, because then, there's still, outside of that though, given your definition of good, still, why does evil or suffering
Forget my definition of good. Your definition of good.
I'm just saying, given yours, why does evil and suffering exist?
All right, all right,
You're
fine.
evading that part
we'll
of
move
the
on to that,
question.
okay? But sir, I got a real problem with your thinking, all right? I don't think you're being honest with yourself. That's not fair. You know very well that I've cornered you totally, intellectually. You know very well that you cannot have goodness without some type of mind to create and define it. It's impossible. This does not define goodness. That does not define goodness. And that camera does not define goodness. And your glasses do not define goodness. Neither does your shirt, your pants, or your sneakers. You've got to have a mind to define goodness. Sorry, you have no option intellectually. This has nothing to do with God. It has nothing to do with Jesus. It has to do with simply thinking fairly. All right, moving on to next. Okay, but your point is, okay, but if this good God exists, why is there evil and suffering? It's real simple, sir. If an all-powerful God chooses to partially limit his power by giving you a free will, by giving me a free will, then if I go up to her, slap her in the face, and say, God made me do it, what am I? A liar, a total liar. God gave me a hand for a purpose, to respect this woman, to love this woman. But because I have a free will, I don't have to respect her, I don't have to love her, I can steal her backpack, I can smack her around, I can abuse her. And if anybody says, God made me do it, they are a liar, flat out. So, why does evil exist? Evil exists because God limited his power, he's all-powerful, but he limited his power by choosing to give her a free will, me a free will, all of us a free will.
Bingo.
Does that make any sense?
It kind of answers it for humanity, but suffering also exists just in the animals.
Good.
Like, why does a zebra deserve to get its throat crushed to death by a lion? Like,
Good.
how is that caring or just? Like, coming from a Christian standpoint, we have sinned as humans. Coming from the Christian standpoint, so
Yep.
we are, we have free will and we can make mistakes and all that.
Yep.
But why not? Why have animals just, not have their perfect little ecosystem where nothing has to suffer and only
Okay,
humans
good.
suffer?
It's a good
Very
point.
good. Now we're thinking, all right? So, Genesis chapters 1 and 2. God creates a good world. God created this and God saw that it was good. God created that and God saw that it was good. God created this and God sees it's good. So when God created, he did a good job. No evil. But Genesis chapter 3 records how human beings rebel against God. And one of the consequences of human beings telling God, get lost, get out of here, is God honors our free will, takes a step back from planet Earth, and nature unravels. And so you're absolutely correct, sir. Animals suffer. I have suffered. We all will suffer. Not because God is sicking us, but because God created a world with free will, people with free will. We chose him to tell him to get out. When he gets out,
So
chaos fills the gap.
because
Genetic breakdown, death occur.
because humans decided to reject God,
Yep.
God punished the animals.
One of the
It
consequences.
seems uncaring and unjust.
No.
Given a try on the God.
No, it's an issue of consequences. Who put Texas State together? Did they do it last summer?
Well, the consequence should go to the humans that did it. You don't punish someone else for somebody else's misdoing.
That would be a nice way for things to happen. But unfortunately, because I have free will, if you're a husband and I smack you around, it might affect how you treat your wife when you go home tonight. It might affect how you treat your kids when you go home tonight. You see, for me to think that, well, I've got free will and it's just me and it's just you, and there are no consequences to the way I exercise my free will, that's a lie. Total lie.
Well, how I would interact with animals is one thing, but how animals should interact with each other. Why does suffering exists between animals, not from humans to animals, but between animals, suffering exists. Why are they being punished through suffering between themselves
They're not
if
being
they
punished.
didn't do anything wrong?
Correct. You're absolutely correct. They didn't do anything wrong. The same way, little babies that I have to bury didn't do anything wrong. But they're born into an unfair world where birth defects occur, and so babies die. Not because they've done something wrong. They have not done anything wrong. But they are born into an unfair, unjust, messed up world. Thanks for raising those issues. Yes, ma'am.
Cliffe did a really good job here at addressing some of these questions. They were really tough, especially that one about Why does God allow evil and suffering? But even so, like, he couldn't answer it comprehensively. And that's one of my biggest questions that I've had with my personal walk in the Christian faith. And I still don't have a complete answer to it. But I recently listened to a lecture by Richard Swinburne at Oxford University, and he did a really good job at addressing this. And I'm not going to do it justice at all, but kind of a premise that he had was free will in the consequences of it is a greater good than to not allow suffering. And it was kind of under 4 conditions, which were suffering brings good, a greater good that couldn't be obtained without it. So, for example, childbirth, the woman suffers, and that baby is a greater good than the suffering that the pregnant mother went through, growing pains. The second one is the good actually has to occur. So if the baby magically wasn't born and she went through all that suffering and pain for no reason, well, that's not good. A loving God wouldn't do that. The third one would have to be, does whoever's administering the suffering, do they have a right to cause it? And I'd argue that God does have a right to cause suffering, being our creator, omnipotent, and all that. And the fourth point is that the good has to outweigh the suffering. And this one is really complicated, and he does a great job explaining this in his video. I'll link it down in the description. But he's basically saying that it's more value to be of use to other people than to be self-indulgent to yourself. And so other people have to suffer in order for other people to be able to be of use to you and for you to be taken care of. There's great virtue in that. But there's a lot of questions like this, and there's a lot that goes into this. And I'm so glad that we're getting this opportunity to look into some of these really hard questions and seek out the truth. Seeking out the truth, it's so important. And I don't want anybody to have blind faith into anything, any sort of religion or belief or idea. And I'm here learning with you. I don't have anywhere close to all the answers at all. I'm just trying to explore and know the truth. And the evidence just points to me that Jesus really is God. And he has done so much for me. So I really encourage you to really consider Jesus and with a very skeptical lens, read the Gospels, look at how Jesus lived, died, rose, taught. Be very skeptical. I encourage you to start with the book of John, read into it, and pay attention to how he acts. I really encourage you. But either ways, keep seeking after that truth. I love you guys. Have a great day.